The morning air was cold and sharp at Camp Phoenix. 50 new recruits stood in perfect lines, back straight, eyes forward. They were the latest batch of hopefuls for the Earth Defense Force. Most were young, barely out of school. Their uniforms were still stiff with newness, their boots unscuffed. Drill Sergeant Tay walked slowly down the line. He was not a tall man, but his presence made everyone stand a little straighter. 20 years of military service had left him with a permanent scowl and eyes that missed nothing. "Look at you," he said, his voice carrying across the training yard. "Earth is fighting for its survival, and this is what they send me." He stopped in front of a young man whose hands were shaking. "Nervous, Recruit Du?" "No, sir," the young man said, his voice cracking. "Lying to a superior officer on your first day?" Tay shook his head. Not a good start. The other recruits kept their eyes forward, each hoping to avoid becoming the next target. Tay continued his walk, pausing occasionally to inspect a recruit more closely or to ask a sharp question about their background. At the end of the line stood a woman who was different from the others. She was small, barely reaching the shoulder of the man next to her. Her black hair was cut short in the standard military style, but there was something in her stance that caught Tay's attention. While the others stood at attention with the stiffness of new recruits trying to remember their training, she held herself with the quiet stillness of someone who had learned to be invisible. Tay checked the tablet in his hand. "Recruit Kim Ju-ri," he read aloud. "Age 26, no military background." He looked up at her. "Says here you volunteered." "Most people your age were drafted." "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice was soft but clear. "Why?" Tay asked. "What makes a civilian with no combat training volunteer for the front lines?" The question hung in the air. The other recruits shifted slightly, curious about the answer. "I have skills that might be useful, sir," she said. Tay's eyebrows rose. "Skills? Your file says you were a student before the invasion, then a civilian rescue worker. That's not military experience." "No, sir. This isn't a rescue operation, Recruit Kim. This is war. The Vespids don't take prisoners, they take test subjects. They don't negotiate, they exterminate. What makes you think you can fight?" Ju-ri met his gaze directly. "Permission to demonstrate, sir?" Something in her calm request made Tay pause. Most new recruits were either terrified or trying too hard to prove themselves. She was neither. "Granted," he said finally. Without a word, Ju-ri began to unbutton her uniform jacket. A murmur ran through the line of recruits. Tay's face darkened. "Recruit, what do you think you're—" He stopped as she removed her jacket, revealing her arms. From wrist to shoulder, both arms were covered in scars. Some were surgical, precise lines that had been carefully closed. Others were jagged and raw, the kind that came from being too far from medical help when injury struck. On her left forearm, a metal plate was embedded in her skin, clearly not standard medical technology. It had the distinctive blue-black sheen of Vespid metal. The yard fell completely silent. Ju-ri turned slowly, showing her back. Her thin undershirt revealed more scars across her shoulder blades. At the base of her neck was a small metal port, a neural interface that gleamed in the morning light. "Civilian rescue worker Soul collapsed, sir." 3 years, she said quietly. "I was there when the second wave hit." Tay's expression changed. Everyone knew about Soul. It had been one of the worst disasters of the war, a major city turned into a killing field in hours. The Vespids had used it as a testing ground for new weapons. The death toll had been catastrophic. "You survived, Soul," he said. It wasn't a question. "Some of us did," she replied. Tay looked at her neural port. "That's Vespid tech, modified." "Yes, sir. It helps me interface with their systems. Useful for disabling their security or repurposing their weapons." "Self-taught?" "Necessity taught me, sir." Tay walked around her slowly, examining the evidence of what she had endured. The other recruits were still frozen in place, but their eyes followed him. "Put your jacket back on, recruit," he said finally. Ju-ri complied, buttoning the uniform with practiced efficiency. When she was done, she looked like any other recruit again. Small, unremarkable. "The rest of you," Tay addressed the line, "are probably wondering why I'm making such a fuss about Recruit Kim. Let me explain something to you. There are 2 kinds of soldiers in this war. Those who have seen what the enemy can do, and those who have only heard about it. The difference matters." He turned back to Ju-ri. "How many civilians did you pull out of Seoul?" 217 confirmed survivors, sir. I stopped counting the dead after the first month. A ripple went through the line of recruits. 217 lives saved by one person was an almost unbelievable number. And the neural port? That's not standard rescue equipment. No, sir. I designed it in the second year. The Vespids use neural networks to control their systems. We found that humans could interface with them with the right connections. It made it easier to disable their traps or redirect their drones. We? Tay asked. My team, sir. There were 12 of us at the start. 4 by the end. The implication hung in the air. 8 hadn't made it. Tay nodded slowly. And now you're here. Why not stay with civilian rescue? For the first time, something like emotion crossed Ju Ri's face. A flash of pain quickly controlled. The Soul Reclamation Project is starting next month, sir. They're going to try to take back the city center. I have detailed knowledge of the area. And the enemy. Tay studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to address all the recruits. Listen carefully. Each of you came here for different reasons. Some were drafted. Some volunteered out of patriotism. Some are running from something. I don't care why you're here. I care what you do now that you are. He gestured to Ju Ri. Recruit Kim has shown us something important today. Experience doesn't always come with a rank or a uniform. It comes from surviving, from adapting, from refusing to give up when everything around you is falling apart. He walked back to the front of the line, his boots crunching on the gravel. Your training starts now. It will be hard. Some of you will wash out. Some of you will excel. But all of you will learn this. The marks of war aren't just scars on your body. They're changes in how you think, how you react, how you see the world. By the time you leave this camp, you'll all carry those marks, visible or not. He looked back at Ju Ri, who had resumed her position at attention. Recruit Kim will be assisting me with your Vespid technology training. You will listen to her as you would listen to me. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The recruits responded in unison. As they marched off to their first training session, Tay fell in step beside Ju Ri. The neural port, he said quietly. How much pain? Considerable, sir, she replied without emotion. But it saved more lives than it cost, including yours. She looked at him directly. I'm still here, sir. That's all that matters, Tay nodded. In her eyes, he saw something he recognized. The look of someone who had seen the worst and chosen to keep fighting anyway. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because there was work to be done. And they were the ones who could do it. Welcome to the Earth Defense Force, Recruit Kim, he said. We need more soldiers like you. The training room was quiet except for the soft hum of the simulation equipment. 20 recruits sat in a half circle, watching as Ju Ri connected a small device to the main screen. Her movements were quick and precise, the kind that came from doing something hundreds of times before. Today we learn about Vespid communication systems, she said. Her voice was calm and clear. Understanding how they talk to each other will help you stay alive. The screen lit up with strange symbols, curved lines and sharp angles that seemed to shift and pulse. This is their basic language, Ju Ri explained. It's not just visual. It has electrical patterns that carry meaning. Recruit Du raised his hand. How did you learn to read it? A small silence followed the question. Ju Ri's fingers paused over the controls. Trial and error, she said finally. Mostly error. Before she could continue, the door opened and Drill Sergeant Tay walked in. The recruits immediately stood at attention. At ease, Tay said. I'm just observing today. He took a seat at the back of the room and nodded for Ju Ri to continue. She turned back to the screen, but Tay noticed a slight tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. The Vespids have 3 main communication channels, she continued. Short-range tactical, mid-range coordination, and long-range command. If you can tap into any of these, you can predict their movements. For the next hour, she walked them through the basics of Vespid communication patterns. The recruits took notes and asked questions. Ju Ri answered each one with patience, breaking down complex ideas into simple steps. When the session ended, Tay asked her to stay behind. The other recruits filed out, talking excitedly about what they had learned. That was good work, Tay said when they were alone. You're a natural teacher. Thank you, sir. But you're holding back. He gestured to the neural port at the base of her neck. You didn't tell them how you really learned all this. Ju Ri's face remained calm, but her eyes darkened slightly. They don't need to know everything, sir. Maybe not. But I do. Tay sat down across from her. Your file has gaps, Recruit Kim, big ones. 3 years in Seoul, but very few details. I need to know what I'm working with. Juri looked at him for a long moment as if deciding something important. What do you want to know, sir? Start with how you got there. Seoul was evacuated before the second wave hit. Most civilians were gone. I was a medical student, she said. 3rd year. When the evacuation order came, some of us stayed behind to help with the hospital patients who couldn't be moved quickly. We thought we had time. A small, bitter smile crossed her face. We were wrong, Tae nodded. The Vespid attack had come faster than anyone predicted. The first blast hit the hospital directly, Juri continued. I was in the basement getting supplies. The building collapsed. I was trapped for 2 days before rescue teams found me. And after that, recovery took 3 months. By then, Seoul was a war zone. The military had established a perimeter around the city, but inside, she shook her head. Inside was chaos. The Vespids were using it as a testing ground. New weapons, new tactics, but you went back in. Yes. Her voice was steady. They needed volunteers for rescue operations. People who knew the city, who had some medical training. I qualified. That doesn't explain this. Tae touched his own neck, indicating her neural port. Juri was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. 6 months after I joined the rescue corps, we found a group of survivors hiding in an old subway station. They had been experimented on. The Vespids had put devices in them, trying to understand human biology. Most were already dead. The rest were dying. She looked down at her hands. One of them was a girl, maybe 12 years old. She had a neural implant similar to what the Vespids use themselves. She was in pain, confused. Before she died, she grabbed my hand. The device reacted to me somehow, connected. Connected how? Tae asked. For a few seconds, I could see what she saw, feel what she felt, and I could see the Vespid network, all their communications, their plans, their locations in the city. Juri looked up. It was overwhelming, but I understood what it meant. If we could access their network, we could save more people. So you built your own version. Not right away. It took time. I collected parts from damaged Vespid equipment. Studied their technology. The first versions were crude. She touched the back of her neck. This was version 7. It works better than the others. The others? Tae's eyes narrowed. You tested this on yourself? Multiple times. There was no one else to test it on, sir. The room was quiet for a moment. Tae tried to imagine the scene. A young medical student alone in the ruins of a city, cutting into her own neck to implant alien technology. The pain must have been extreme, he said finally. Yes. Her answer was simple, without self-pity. And the arm plate? Juri rolled up her sleeve, revealing the blue-black metal embedded in her left forearm. This was necessary after a building collapse crushed my arm. The bones wouldn't heal properly. Vespid metal is stronger than our medical implants, and it interfaces with their technology. It lets me connect to their systems physically when the neural connection isn't enough. Tae shook his head slowly. Most people would have given up. Left the city. Found somewhere safe. There was nowhere safe, sir. And there were still people trapped inside who needed help. How many rescue missions did you run? 143 official missions. Dozens more that weren't recorded. And the scars on your back? For the first time, Juri hesitated. Not all Vespids are soldiers, sir. Some are scientists. They're curious about humans. About how we work. I was captured once during my 2nd year. They had me for 3 days before my team found me. The implication was clear. Tae had seen the reports of what happened to humans in Vespid labs. Few survived. Fewer still remained sane afterward. Yet you went back in after that. Yes. Why? Juri looked at him directly. Because I could. Because I understood their systems better than anyone else. Because every time we saved someone, it meant the Vespids hadn't won completely. Tae stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the other recruits were running drills, their movements still awkward and unpracticed. Your file says you were called Ghost in Seoul. That true? A small smile touched Juri's lips. It wasn't my idea. The survivors started it. Said I appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. The name fits. Tae turned back to her. But ghosts are dead, Recruit Kim. You're very much alive. Sometimes I'm not so sure, sir. The honesty in her voice made Tae pause. He studied her face. Young still, despite everything, but with eyes that had seen too much. The Soul Reclamation Project, he said. That's why you're really here, isn't it? You want to go back. I know the city better than anyone, sir. I know where the Vespids are strongest, where they're vulnerable. I can help. At what cost to yourself? Juri didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet but firm. Some prices are worth paying, sir. Tay nodded slowly. Finish your training first. Show these recruits what real preparation looks like. Then we'll talk about Seoul. Yes, sir. As she gathered her teaching materials, Tay watched her careful movements. The marks of war were clear on her body, but it was what lay beneath, the determination, the quiet strength that truly set her apart. Recruit Kim, he said as she reached the door. Sir, what you did in Seoul, saving all those people, surviving what you survived, it matters. Don't forget that. For a moment, something like surprise crossed her face. Then she nodded once and left the room. Tay remained by the window watching the training yard. The war with the Vespids had created soldiers of all kinds. Some were made in training camps like this one. Others were forged in the ruins of cities like Seoul. He wondered which kind would ultimately win this war. Combat simulation beginning in 30 seconds, announced the automated voice. All personnel clear the testing area. In the observation room above the training floor, Drill Sergeant Tay stood with 3 other instructors. Through the reinforced glass, they watched as Ju-Ri entered the empty space below. She wore standard combat gear with one addition, a thin cable connecting her neural port to a small device on her belt. What's that for? Asked Captain Hoon, pointing to the cable. She calls it an interface amplifier, Tay explained. Helps her connect to Vespid systems faster. Seems like cheating to me, muttered Lieutenant Sun, the weapons instructor. No one else gets special equipment. No one else spent 3 years pulling survivors out of Seoul, Tay replied sharply. This isn't about being fair. It's about seeing what she can do. The room fell silent as the countdown reached 0. The empty floor below suddenly transformed as the holographic projectors activated. A ruined cityscape appeared. Broken buildings, overturned vehicles, debris scattered everywhere. It looked eerily like the real Seoul after the Vespid attacks. Scenario loading. Urban rescue under enemy fire, said the automated voice. Objective. Locate and extract 3 wounded soldiers behind enemy lines. Vespid patrols active. Difficulty level, maximum. Captain Hoon raised his eyebrows. Maximum? Most recruits start at level 3. She's not most recruits, Tay said simply. Below, Ju-Ri crouched behind a holographic concrete barrier, surveying the scene. Unlike the practice runs the other recruits had done, she didn't immediately check her weapon or look for the most direct path forward. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, her hand touching the device at her belt. What's she doing? Asked Sun. Listening, Tay said. The simulation includes Vespid communication signals. She's tapping into them. After a few seconds, Ju-Ri opened her eyes and began to move. Her path seemed strange at first. She went away from the objective markers, deeper into the ruined city. She moved differently than the other recruits too. Where they had been taught to run from cover to cover, she flowed like water, never fully exposed, using the smallest pieces of debris as concealment. She's going the wrong way, Sun pointed out. Wait, Tay said. A Vespid patrol appeared ahead, 4 drone soldiers and a commander. In the simulation, they were just light projections, but their movements and behaviors were modeled on real Vespid tactics. Most recruits would either hide or engage in a firefight. Ju-Ri did neither. She found a damaged control panel on a nearby wall and connected her device to it. Her fingers moved quickly over the interface. What is she? Hoon began. Suddenly, the Vespid patrol changed direction, moving away from her position and down a side street. She hacked their patrol route, Tay explained. Sent them false coordinates. That's impossible, Sun protested. The simulation doesn't allow for that level of interaction. It does if you understand Vespid systems well enough, Tay said. Which she does. They watched as Ju-Ri continued through the ruined city. Twice more she encountered Vespid patrols, and each time she avoided direct confrontation. Once by redirecting them, once by creating a distraction with a damaged power line. She hasn't fired a single shot, Hoon noted. Most recruits would have emptied half their ammo by now. Ammunition was scarce in Seoul, Tay said quietly. Rescue workers learned to be creative. Finally, Ju-Ri reached a collapsed building where the simulation indicated the wounded soldiers were trapped. Unlike the standard approach of breaking down doors or clearing a path, she found a small opening in the rubble, and slipped inside like a shadow. Inside the building, the simulation showed 3 injured soldiers. One had a leg wound, another had a chest injury, and the third was unconscious with head trauma. According to the scenario, they needed to be extracted within 10 minutes before Vespid reinforcements arrived. Ju-Ri assessed each soldier quickly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She applied simulated medical treatments, a tourniquet for the leg wound, a pressure bandage for the chest injury, and a stabilizing neck brace for the head trauma. Her movements were precise, wasting no motion. Her medical training is showing, Hoon commented. Good technique. Now comes the hard part, Tay said. Getting them out. The standard procedure would be to call for backup or create a defensive position. Instead, Ju reconnected her device to what looked like a broken Vespid communication node in the corner of the room. What's she doing now? Sun asked. Watch, Tay said. A moment later, a small Vespid transport vehicle appeared outside the building. It hovered there, seemingly waiting. She's commandeered an enemy vehicle, Tay explained, using their own systems against them. That's not in the training manual, Sun muttered. Neither is surviving in Seoul for 3 years, Tay replied. They watched as Ju carefully moved the injured soldiers to the vehicle. She secured them inside, then took the controls. The vehicle began to move through the ruined streets, avoiding the main patrol routes. Just as they were nearing the extraction point, the simulation threw in its final challenge. A large Vespid force appeared, blocking the direct path. There were too many to hack or redirect. Now she'll have to fight, Sun said with satisfaction. But Ju surprised them again. Instead of engaging the enemy force, she drove the vehicle into what looked like an abandoned building. Inside was a Vespid supply depot, another part of the simulation that most recruits never found. She connected to a large control panel and began working quickly. On the monitors in the observation room, they could see what she was doing. She was overloading the depot's power systems. She's creating a diversion, Hoon realized. As the Vespid forces converged on the depot, drawn by the power surge, Ju moved the transport vehicle out through a back exit. By the time the simulated explosion rocked the depot, she was already at the extraction point unloading the wounded soldiers. Simulation complete, announced the automated voice. Time 8 minutes 12 seconds. Casualties, 0. Ammunition used, 0. Mission success rate, 100%. The holographic city faded away, leaving Ju standing alone on the empty training floor. She disconnected the cable from her neural port and looked up at the observation room, waiting for feedback. The room was silent. The 3 instructors stared at the performance metrics on their screens. 8 minutes, 12 seconds, Hoon said finally. That's a new record. By almost 3 minutes. And she didn't fire a single shot, Tay added. No casualties. No collateral damage. Sun shook his head. It's not realistic. In a real combat situation, she'd be doing exactly what she did for 3 years in Seoul. Tay cut him off. This wasn't theoretical for her. This was Tuesday. He pressed the intercom button. Recruit Kim, report to the observation room. When Ju entered a few minutes later, the 3 instructors were still reviewing her performance data. She stood at attention, waiting. At ease, recruit, Tay said. That was impressive. Thank you, sir. How did you know about the supply depot? Sun asked. That's not in any of the briefing materials. Vespid outposts follow patterns, sir, she explained. They always place supply depots within 200 meters of major checkpoints. It's part of their logistics protocol. And the transport vehicle? Hoon asked. How did you take control of it? Their vehicles use the same base code as their communication systems, sir. Once you understand one, you can interface with the other. Sun frowned. These are simulation details. They're not meant to be that accurate to real Vespid systems. Actually, Tay said, they are. The simulation is built using data from actual Vespid encounters. Recruit Kim just understands their systems better than the simulation designers expected. He turned to Ju. The other recruits will run this simulation tomorrow. I want you to observe and provide feedback afterward. Yes, sir. One more thing, Tay added. The Seoul Reclamation Planning Committee is meeting next week. They've requested someone with first-hand knowledge of the city to consult. I've submitted your name. For the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Phoenix, Ju calm facade cracked slightly. A mix of emotions crossed her face, hope, determination, and something like fear. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. As she left the room, Sun turned to Tay. "Are you sure about this? She's still a recruit." "She stopped being just a recruit the moment she walked into Seoul after the attack," Tay replied. "What we saw today wasn't a soldier following training. It was a survivor using everything she learned to stay alive and complete the mission." He looked at the empty training floor below, where the ghostly outline of the ruined city had been. "And that's exactly what we need for the Seoul reclamation." The mess hall was loud with the sound of recruits talking and laughing. 6 weeks into training, they had formed their own groups and routines. At a table near the back, 5 recruits sat together, their trays nearly empty. They were Squad 217, assigned to train as a unit for the remainder of the program. "Has anyone seen Kim today?" asked Recruit Bayek, a tall young man with a serious face. "She missed the morning run." "Sergeant Tay called her to headquarters," said Recruit Do. "Something about the Seoul planning." The others nodded. Everyone knew that Juri had been spending time with the officers planning the Seoul reclamation mission. It was unusual for a recruit to be included in such high-level meetings, but her knowledge of the city was too valuable to ignore. "Do you think we'll be assigned to Seoul?" asked Recruit Park, the youngest of the group. Her round face still held traces of childhood, though her eyes had grown harder during training. "I hope so," said Recruit Han, a former factory worker with strong arms and a quiet voice. "That's why I requested this squad." The others looked at him in surprise. "You requested Squad 217? Bach asked. "Why?" Han looked down at his food. "My sister was in Seoul when it fell. A rescue worker pulled her out 3 months later. She had been hiding in the old market district, living on whatever she could find." "A rescue worker?" Du leaned forward. "Was it—" "I don't know for sure," Han interrupted. "My sister was delirious when they found her. She talked about someone with metal in their arm who moved like a ghost. I thought maybe—" He trailed off, but everyone understood. They all had their reasons for being there, for choosing this particular squad. "My cousin was rescued from the university hospital," Park said quietly. "He said a woman with a neural port saved his group when Vespids cornered them. She hacked into the alien systems and led them to safety." Beck nodded slowly. "My brother was part of a military unit trapped in the subway system. Rescue workers found them after 2 weeks. He said one of them could talk to Vespid tech somehow." They fell silent, looking at each other with new understanding. Before anyone could speak again, the mess hall door opened and Juri walked in. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but her movements were as precise as always. She got her food and headed toward their table. The others made room for her, shifting to create a space at the end of the bench. "How was the meeting?" Du asked as she sat down. "Long," Juri replied. She began to eat methodically, as if it were just another task to complete. "Did they tell you anything about the mission?" Park pressed. Juri looked up, studying each of their faces. "Why are you also interested in Seoul?" The squad members exchanged glances. Finally, Han spoke. "We all have connections to the city. People who were saved. Family who were lost. I see." Juri's face remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. "The planning is still in early stages. They're gathering intelligence, mapping Vespid positions. Will we be part of it?" Beck asked directly. Juri hesitated. "I've recommended Squad 217 for a specific role. Whether they accept that recommendation is up to command." The others straightened, excitement visible on their faces. "What role?" Du asked. "Advance team," Juri said. "Small group, moving ahead of the main force to disable key Vespid systems and clear paths for the larger units." "That's dangerous," Park said, her voice small. "Yes," Juri agreed simply. "It is. But you'll be with us," Han said. It wasn't a question. Juri looked at him for a long moment. "If the assignment is approved, yes." The conversation shifted to other topics. The next day's training schedule, rumors about a new weapons shipment, complaints about the food. Juri ate quietly, speaking only when directly addressed. But she watched her squad mates with careful attention, noting how they interacted, how they supported each other. Later that evening, as the recruits prepared for lights out, Juri was cleaning her gear in the corner of the barracks. The metal plate in her arm caught the light as she worked, drawing Han's attention. He approached slowly and sat on the edge of the bed across from her. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. Juri nodded without looking up from her work. My sister was in the Dongdaemun Market District, Building 47, third floor. She had a broken leg and couldn't move. She survived on rainwater and whatever food was left in the abandoned shops. Ju-ri's hand stilled. She said someone found her in the second month. A woman who appeared out of nowhere treated her leg and brought her food every few days. She said this woman had metal in her arm and moved without making a sound. The other survivors called her Ghost. Han leaned forward. Was that you? For a long moment, Ju-ri didn't respond. Then she set down the piece of equipment she had been cleaning. Building 47 was dangerous, she said finally. Vespid patrols passed by every 6 hours. The third floor had a hidden space behind a collapsed wall where someone small could hide. Han's breath caught. So it was you. There were 12 people hiding in that building by the end. Your sister was the first we found there. She said you saved her life. Ju-ri shook her head slightly. She saved her own life. She was smart enough to find a good hiding place and ration her supplies. We just helped her get out when it was possible. Why didn't you say anything? When you found out we were all connected to Seoul, what would be the point? Ju-ri asked. We're here to train, to prepare. Personal connections don't change that. They matter, Han insisted. Knowing who we're fighting with, who we can trust, it matters. Ju-ri looked at him directly for the first time. Do you trust me, Recruit Han? Yes, he said without hesitation. We all do. Then that's enough. She returned to cleaning her gear. The past is just the past. What matters is what we do next. Han watched her for a moment longer, then nodded and returned to his own bunk. Across the room, the other members of Squad 217 had been listening quietly. They exchanged glances but said nothing. The next morning, Squad 217 was called to the training field earlier than usual. Drill Sergeant Tae was waiting for them, along with Captain Hoon and a woman they didn't recognize. She wore the insignia of the Seoul Reclamation Command. Squad 217, Tae called as they lined up. Today you begin specialized training. Your squad has been selected for a priority mission in the upcoming Seoul operation. The recruits stood straighter, excitement visible on their faces despite their attempts to remain professional. This is Colonel Min, Tae continued, gesturing to the woman. She'll be overseeing your specialized training from now on. Colonel Min stepped forward. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a stern expression. She walked slowly down the line, examining each recruit carefully. When she reached Ju-ri, she stopped. Recruit Kim, she said. Your reputation precedes you. Ghost of Seoul, they called you. Yes, ma'am, Ju-ri replied evenly. I lost my husband in Seoul, Colonel Min said. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. He was stationed at the Western Command Post when it fell. No survivors were reported. A heavy silence fell over the group. Ju-ri met the colonel's gaze without flinching. The Western Command Post had a bunker level, Ju-ri said quietly. We found 3 survivors there in the 4th month. 2 soldiers and a communications officer. They were evacuated through the river tunnels. Colonel Min's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. My husband was a communications officer. I don't remember all the names, Ju-ri admitted. But the records would be in the evacuation database. The colonel nodded once. I'll look into it. She turned to address the entire squad. Your training begins now. It will be harder than anything you've experienced so far. Some of you may not complete it, but those who do will be at the forefront of taking back our city. She looked at each of them in turn. Squad 217, you were chosen because each of you has a connection to Seoul, a reason to fight beyond duty. Remember that reason in the days ahead. You'll need it. As the colonel walked away with Sergeant Tae, the members of Squad 217 looked at each other with new understanding. They were no longer just random recruits assigned to the same unit. They were a team with a shared purpose, and at their center was Ju-ri, the ghost of Seoul, who had saved people they loved without ever knowing the connections that would one day bring them together. The morning of graduation day dawned clear and cold. The training grounds of Camp Phoenix were decorated with the simple flags of the Earth Defense Force. No elaborate ceremony was planned. The war didn't allow for such luxuries. But there was a quiet pride in the air as the recruits prepared for their final day as trainees. Squad 217 stood together near their barracks, checking each other's uniforms one last time. 3 months of intensive training had changed them. They moved as a unit now, each person aware of the others without needing to look. Their bodies were stronger, their faces leaner. I can't believe we made it, Park said, adjusting her collar. The youngest member of the squad had perhaps changed the most. Her round face had hardened into determined lines, her movements confident where they had once been hesitant. "Did you ever doubt we would?" Bike asked with a small smile. "Every day for the first month," Han admitted, "especially after that night exercise in the rain." They all laughed, remembering the miserable 12-hour training mission that had nearly broken them. All except Juri, who stood slightly apart looking toward the command building. "Are you nervous?" Du asked her. Juri turned, seeming surprised by the question. "No, why would I be?" "Because tomorrow we deploy to Seoul," Park said. "We're going back to the place you escaped from." A shadow crossed Juri's face. "I never escaped Seoul," she said quietly. "Part of me never left." Before anyone could respond, a whistle blew across the training grounds. The recruits quickly formed up in their assigned positions. Squad 217 took their place at the front of the formation, as befitted their special assignment status. Drill Sergeant Tae marched to the center of the parade ground, his uniform perfectly pressed, his face as stern as the day they had arrived. Behind him stood a row of officers, including Colonel Min and several high-ranking officials they didn't recognize. "Recruits of Camp Phoenix," Tae called out, his voice carrying across the grounds. "Today you graduate from training and become soldiers of the Earth Defense Force. Some of you will join standard combat units. Others will serve in support roles. And some," his eyes moved to Squad 217, "will undertake special missions that may determine the course of this war." He paced slowly in front of the formation. "When you arrived here, I questioned whether you had what it takes to fight the Vespids. Today I have my answer. You do." A murmur of pride ran through the ranks. "This is not a traditional graduation," Tae continued. "We have no time for speeches or celebrations. Tomorrow many of you will deploy to active combat zones. But before you go, there is one tradition we will observe." He nodded to an aide, who stepped forward with a small wooden box. "Throughout your training, one recruit has stood out, not just for skill or strength, but for something more important: experience. Real experience earned through sacrifice and survival." Tae turned toward Squad 217. "Recruit Kim Ju-ri, front and center." Ju-ri stepped forward, her face calm, her posture perfect. She stood at attention before Sergeant Tae, waiting. "When you arrived at Camp Phoenix," Tae said, "I asked what made you think you could fight. You answered by showing me your scars, the marks of war already written on your body." He opened the wooden box. Inside was a medal. Not the standard military decoration, but something different. It was the Civilian Valor Cross, the highest honor given to non-military personnel who displayed extraordinary courage during the Vespid invasion. This medal was awarded 3 years ago to an individual known only as Ghost, a civilian rescue worker who saved over 200 lives during the Seoul collapse. The recipient never came forward to claim it. A hush fell over the assembly. Juri's expression didn't change, but her eyes fixed on the medal. The citation reads, "For extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming danger. For selfless service to the people of Seoul when all hope seemed lost. For embodying the best of humanity in our darkest hour." Tae lifted the medal from its box. "Recruit Kim, or should I say Ghost, this belongs to you." He pinned the medal to her uniform. As he did, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Some marks of war should be worn where everyone can see them." Juri stood perfectly still, her eyes forward. But those close enough could see the slight tremor in her hands, the only sign that the moment had affected her. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Tae stepped back and saluted her. She returned the salute crisply. "Recruits," Tae addressed the entire assembly again. "Remember this moment. The person standing before you wasn't made into a soldier by our training. She was forged into something stronger by survival, by refusing to surrender when surrender would have been easier." He gestured for Ju-ri to turn and face the other recruits. "This is what victory looks like. Not just defeating the enemy, but preserving what makes us human even in the face of inhuman threats." The recruits stood in respectful silence. In the front row, Squad 217 watched their teammate with pride and a new understanding. The quiet, reserved woman who had trained alongside them was not just another recruit. She was already a legend. After the ceremony, as the recruits were dismissed to prepare for deployment, Colonel Min approached Squad 217. "A word, Specialist Kim," she said, using Juri's new rank. Juri nodded to her squad mates, who moved a respectful distance away but remained within sight. The bond between them had grown too strong to be completely broken, even by military protocol. I checked the evacuation records, Colonel Min said without preamble. My husband was among the 3 you rescued from the Western Command Post. Ju-Ri's expression softened slightly. I'm glad he made it out. He didn't, Min said, her voice flat. The transport carrying the evacuees was hit by Vespid fire 2 kilometers from the safe zone. There were no survivors. A heavy silence fell between them. Ju-Ri's eyes showed a flash of pain before returning to their usual calm. I'm sorry, she said simply. We tried. I know you did. Min's face remained composed, professional. That's why I requested to oversee your squad's training. I wanted to understand what kind of person would go back into that hell day after day knowing the odds. And do you understand? Min studied her for a long moment. I think so. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what needed to be done because you could. Ju-Ri nodded once, a small acknowledgement. Tomorrow your squad deploys to Seoul, Min continued. You'll be the advance team for the Reclamation Force. Your mission is to infiltrate the city center, disable key Vespid systems, and create openings for the main assault. We're ready, Ju-Ri said. Are you? Min asked, her voice softer now. Going back to that place after everything you experienced there? For the first time, Ju-Ri's calm facade cracked slightly. I never really left, Colonel. Every night when I close my eyes, I'm still there, in the ruins in the dark, listening for Vespid patrols. And yet you volunteered to return, yes? Why? Ju-Ri touched the metal on her uniform. Because there might still be people trapped there waiting for rescue. Because the city deserves to be reclaimed. Because the work isn't finished. Min nodded slowly. Your squad is devoted to you, you know. They would follow you anywhere. They shouldn't, Ju-Ri said quietly. I'm not a leader. I'm just a survivor. Sometimes that's what people need most. Someone who knows how to survive. Min straightened, returning to her official manner. Report to the deployment bay at 500 tomorrow. Your equipment has been prepared according to your specifications. Thank you, Colonel. As Min walked away, the rest of Squad 217 rejoined Ju-Ri. They had been watching the conversation from a distance, curious but respectful. Everything okay? Han asked. Yes, Ju-Ri said. We deploy at 500. They nodded, accepting the information without question. Their trust in her was complete. I noticed something earlier, Beck said, changing the subject. During the ceremony. What? Ju-Ri asked. Look at our uniforms, he said, pointing to his shoulder. Ju-Ri looked more closely. Each member of Squad 217 had added a small emblem to their uniform. A simple ghost silhouette, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. When did you do this? She asked, surprised. Last night, Park said with a small smile. We decided if we're going to follow the Ghost of Seoul into battle, we should wear her mark. It's against regulation, Ju-Ri pointed out. So is having Vespid technology embedded in your arm, Du countered. Some rules matter less than others. For the first time since they had known her, Ju-Ri smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes and softened the hard lines of her face. Thank you, she said simply. As they walked back to the barracks to prepare for deployment, Drill Sergeant Tay watched from a distance. He had seen many recruits come through Camp Phoenix, but few had made the impression that Ju-Ri had. When she had first arrived and he had questioned her experience, she had answered by showing her scars, the physical marks of war etched into her body. But the true marks of war, he now understood, were deeper. They were in how she moved, how she thought, how she led without trying to lead. Tomorrow, Squad 217 would return to Seoul, led by the woman who had never truly escaped its ruins. And Tay had no doubt that if anyone could reclaim the fallen city, it would be her, the ghost who carried its scars as both burden and badge of honor. The marks of war had shaped her, but they had not broken her. And that, Tay knew, was the most important lesson she had taught them all.